Chapter 1. Robin sat on the cold floor inside the freezing prison cell. It had been more than a day since the guards had last brought her food. In just a week, her skin had gone from sun-kissed to a pale white. And in a month, she had lost a lot of weight, and heavy bags drooped under her eyes. She raised a hand and rubbed against the power inhibitor enclosed around her neck. Bright pink grazes marked her knuckles from when she attempted to punch a hole through the thick steel walls. The first 24 hours Robin had spent here she spent crying and pleading with the guards, and after those 24 hours, she found that she no longer had any more tears left to cry. Robin told the grand adjudicators that she never meant to hurt anybody, but they chose to ignore her. She closed her eyes and lost herself, trying to remember how this all started. Tilda. The sparkling lights of the grand city Elsglow were glittering in the night. Many of Elsglow's inhabitants stayed at home relaxing and enjoying their final Sunday before school began, making it was the perfect time for Robin to practice unleashing her abilities. Her unrivaled strength, inhuman speed, and the ability to fly made her a perfect candidate for becoming the next Prime, an accolade given to the strongest hero in the country. There was only one problem with that. Robin had no intention of becoming a hero. Her only goal was to fit in with society and go on with her life. To do that, she'd have to learn perfect control over her powers. Every night since the summer had begun, Robin snuck out and trained her powers until she could see the sun beginning to rise. When Robin was a child, she had created a system in her head to help control herself. She would picture a scale of 1 to 10 in her head. Robin's first stage was her weakest state, equivalent to a normal, powerless human. Her 10th stage was Robin's true power, her most powerful state. Most of the time she'd keep her strength at around the 3rd or 4th stage, considering that was roughly above average for a human, enough for her to at least defend herself. Because Robin's mother had died during childbirth and her wealthy father never being around, the only parental figure she had in her life was her maid, Miss Ross. For as long as she could remember, she had been in Miss Ross's care. As a child, each time Robin felt hopeless, Robin would remember that Miss Ross was at home with a plate of dinosaur nuggets waiting for her. And of course, she couldn't forget about her best friend, Tristan. She had first met him in elementary school. After that they'd been almost inseparable. The two of them were reckless, and would get in trouble almost every day, or in any case, it felt like they did. Tristan was the one who convinced her to start playing basketball in middle school, and he showed up to every one of her games, along with Miss Ross, of course. Unfortunately, last year during freshman year, Robin and Tristan didn't share any classes together, and she was busy with work after school, so they didn't get to hang out very often. Even during the summer, they found themselves occupied. But this year would be different. They had most of their classes together, so of course they'd be able to spend more time with each other. At least, that's what they both initially thought. Tilda. Tristan waited at their usual meeting place, a lone cherry blossom tree in an oak forest, before they walked through the city park to school. He sat on a picnic table and looked towards the park entrance. Nobody had come in or gone out in the past 10 minutes. Worry began to creep inside him. Someone tapped Tristan on his shoulder. Out of surprise, he jumped out from where he sat and spun around to confront them. "Who are?" He suddenly realized who it was, although she used to look more like a geek. She no longer wore her braces, her hair was silver blonde now, and she looked like one of those models from the cover of the magazines his father liked to read. Bewildered, Tristan looked at her from head to toe. "Robin?" She raised an eyebrow at him. "Has it really been such a long time you don't even recognize me?" Robin questioned. He stammered and she laughed at him. They continued to walk to school and began to share the things that happened to them during summer break. Robin told him that she'd gotten a new job as a barista, which Tristan didn't seem to be surprised about. He then proceeded to drop a bombshell. "Oh yeah, I got a girlfriend," Tristan revealed way too casually. He expected her to be surprised, sure. But Robin's face filled with enough astonishment that it slightly offended him. After traveling for another 5 minutes, they finally arrived at school. Standing on the front lawn was a 15-meter-tall gold statue of the hero Genesis, who happens to be the current Prime. He wore a cape with a theta, the symbol for theta, and a crown-like headband, reminiscent of the wreaths ancient Greek gladiators wore. Above the school entrance were giant letters that read, Keywood General High School. Keywood was one of the 7 boroughs of Ellesglow City. Esterpool, Fairmount, Aylport, West Fair, Rockness, and Shadowgate were the other 6. The large 3-story building stood by a river that led into the vibrant Ellesglow Bay. Across them was Aylport, the harbour district. For many years, Keywood General High School was one of the best schools in all of Ellesglow. The school had won the Prime Games almost every year since the games began 20 years ago. KGHS's current record was 14 wins and 6 losses. Pretty phenomenal considering every school in Ellesglow competed every year. Tristan and Robin were about to enter the school together, but Tristan's stomach began to rumble. He turned to Robin and smiled warily. "I'm gonna go visit the cafeteria, do you wanna come with me?" Robin shook her head. He had forgotten that she didn't like school food at all. "I'll see you at class," she told him before walking off. That could have gone better, Robin told herself as she walked down the hallway to her classroom. She thought about Tristan and his reaction to when he first saw her. Why did he look so shocked? Boys are weird. Still deep in thought, Robin almost didn't notice the sounds of a struggle coming from around the corner. "Where's my money?" She heard someone bark. Robin recognized that voice. It belonged to the popular kid, Oliver Turner. His long, jet-black hair he kept in a man bun, and the long strands of hair, framing the side of his face, drove most girls insane. The fact that he was the school's quarterback was an added bonus. However, under all of his charm, hid something most people chose to ignore. He was a tyrant. She watched as Oliver shoved a kid against a locker. His friends began chuckling. Oliver raised his fist, about to strike him, but stopped when he noticed that she was watching. His attitude made a complete 180, and he patted the kid on the head. "Have my money by tomorrow," he demanded before the kid ran off. He said something to his buddies before they walked away too, leaving them alone. Oliver gave Robin a pleasant smile that would probably make a normal girl faint out of embarrassment, but it had no such effect on her. He approached her and wrapped an arm around her shoulder. Robin had grown accustomed to this sort of behavior from him since they worked at the same place together. "How've you been, Robin?" he asked soothingly. "All right," she responded coldly. He brushed his finger across her arm, and she fought off the urge to smash his face in with her fist. Oliver leaned in closer, close enough that it was uncomfortable. Robin sidestepped, grabbed him by the forearm, and flung his arm away from her. He gave her a thrilled look, and she scowled at him before releasing his arm and walking away. Everyone at this school is so weird, Robin thought. At class, her history teacher was giving a boring introduction speech. One of those cliché "I expect great things from this class" speeches. Oftentimes she caught Oliver stealing glances at her. She would glare at him, and he'd grin before looking back at the teacher. Robin didn't fail to notice that Tristan was nowhere to be seen, and she knew that he had this class, so that was strange. After 40 minutes, the lecture was over and the class promptly ended. The next class she had was literature, a class that Robin was certain that Tristan was in. But once again, he wasn't there. Concern began to overcome her. Why would he skip class on the first day of school? It had been 3 hours since she had last seen Tristan. He hadn't shown up to a single class so far. She was wandering around school since it was her break period when she finally spotted him. He was leaning against a wall outside the school with his phone in hand. "Yo, Tristan," Robin called. Tristan turned to her and waved, though his face became anxious. "Where have you been? You haven't been to any of our classes." Tristan scratched the back of his head. He seemed to be getting increasingly nervous. "Well, Tristan!" someone cried. A girl ran up to him and lunged at him. She wrapped her arms around Tristan and turned towards Robin. "And who's this?" she asked him. "My childhood friend, Robin," Tristan answered. The girl looked at her from head to toe, similar to how Tristan had looked at her beforehand. Robin quickly realized that this was Tristan's new girlfriend. "Hi, I'm Alice," she introduced. The girl, Alice, wore a black long-sleeve shirt with sparkles traced around the collar, pink and white sneakers, and track shorts even though she seemed like the kind of person who would never run for anything. Alice smiled at her, but Robin spotted a hint of contempt in her eyes. She sensed something undetectable trying to enter her mind, like some sort of invisible aura. Robin focused and entered her fifth stage. Surely enough, pink energy coming from Alice was wrapping itself up around her head. Robin returned her smile and sent an ounce of her own power at Alice. Robin's energy hit her, and she stumbled back into Tristan, who gave her a concerned look. "Are you okay?" Tristan examined. Alice nodded. "I'm fine, just dizzy," Alice responded, now glaring daggers at Robin, who continued to smile. Robin turned away and waved a hand over a shoulder. "Since everything's okay, I'll be leaving now." She turned over her shoulder and looked at Alice. "Nice meeting you, Tilda." After another 4 hours, school eventually ended. Robin didn't see Tristan for the rest of the day. They didn't even walk home together like they agreed to do earlier. He must have skipped school with his girlfriend. Robin shook her head in distaste and continued walking home. Robin leaned against the stair railing outside her townhouse and looked up at the sky. She remembered the first time her father had sent her away to this giant building along with Miss Ross, and how much she initially hated it. It wasn't until she first invited Tristan over for dinner that she stopped hating her house. He constantly told her about how cool her house had been in comparison to his tiny apartment. Why do I keep thinking about the past? The door opened and Robin changed her attention from the sky. Miss Ross held a tray of cookies in her hands and gave her a bright smile. "Welcome home, Robin," she greeted. The aroma of warm cookies began to make its way towards Robin's nose. "Are those for me?" she asked jokingly. Miss Ross nodded. "And for your guests." "Guests?" Robin turned and saw a couple of guys standing at the bottom of the stairs. She noticed that they wore school uniforms, but they were different from the ones they wore. "Hey Robin, can we talk to you for a second?" one of the boys asked. Robin already knew they weren't there to talk, and felt her rage building up, but she didn't want to make Miss Ross worry. She took a deep breath and grinned. "Fine, but not for long. I don't want my cookies to get cold." She looked back at Miss Ross. "I'll be back in a couple of minutes." Robin followed the group of boys around the block and through an alleyway. It was dark, and they were too far inside the alley for anyone to hear screaming. Good. Someone standing behind Robin stuck their foot out, tripping her, and sending her face first into concrete. She gritted her teeth and closed her eyes. Endure, she willed herself. Endure and reap the benefits. A boy grabbed her by the collar and shoved her into the alley wall. "What did you do to piss her off?" he interrogated. He shook his head and raised his fist. "Never mind that. Let me just end this quickly, so I can." "Wait," a girl said from the alley entrance. Robin looked over the boy's shoulder and glared. It was the girl from before. "Alice. I want to speak with her for a moment." Alice coolly walked past her thugs, who were practically drooling over her. She stopped maybe a foot away from Robin and smirked. Robin winked in return, and Alice's smile quickly dropped. She slapped Robin across the face, hard enough that her cheek stung. Her goons snickered behind her, and Robin tasted blood. Robin's rage was spiraling, and becoming even harder to control. Alice grabbed her by the hair and lifted Robin's face up to hers. "Do us both a favor and stay away from Tristan." Once again, Alice tried to infiltrate her mind and Robin repelled her attack, sending her staggering back. "You bitch!" she shrieked. Alice lifted her arm to strike again, but someone showed up from the alley entrance. Darkness spilled everywhere, and any bit of light within the alleyway had been quickly diminished. "I'd stop now if I were you," Oliver ordered. "Or someone might get seriously hurt." "Who the hell is this guy?" one boy asked. "Doesn't matter," another said. "He's gonna die." The thug approached Oliver and revealed snake hands. The snakes grew in size and rushed him. Oliver laughed and lifted a finger. In an instant, the snakes were cut down, and the boy screamed in agony. Surprised, Robin blinked. The strike had been so quick she didn't even see what happened. Oliver carelessly strolled up to where Robin and Alice stood as if he hadn't just cut some kid's fingers off. "Leave," Oliver commanded. Alice smiled confidently. "No," Alice told him. Robin watched as Alice's pink energy made its way up to Oliver and began surrounding his head. Surprisingly, Oliver brushed it off as though it were just a minor inconvenience. She gaped at him and started stammering. How Alice stumbled back. "Why are you?" This time, Oliver was the one who grinned. "Trust me, I'm doing this for your sake," he explained. If I hadn't interfered, he looked at Robin with cold eyes. She would have destroyed all of you. Tilda. Robin and Oliver were left alone in the alley. Alice and her thugs had gone a while ago. He was standing a few feet in front of her, and she sat on the ground with her back against the wall. Robin refused to look at him. How did he see through me? She wondered. You can heal your face now, he told her. He knew about that too? Robin sighed. 6th stage, she said out loud. The mark Alice had given her had instantly healed, and her mouth was no longer bleeding. Though, her shirt was dirty and slightly ripped. That made her somewhat unhappy. Oliver started to walk away, and she wanted to say something to him. How did he know about her powers? What kind of powers did he possess? She had so many questions, she didn't know where to begin. Thank you, she ended up saying. He stopped walking and beheld her. Were you really gonna kill them? Oliver questioned. Robin stopped and thought for a couple of moments. The truth was, I don't know, Robin admitted. Oliver's golden brown eyes continued to stare into her soul. All this staring was beginning to make her feel uncomfortable. Robin stood up and left Oliver in the alley. Tilda. The next couple of days were actually decent. Tristan started showing up to classes. His girlfriend wasn't bothering Robin, but she did catch her glaring often. The school was in an uproar since the pep rally was happening later that night. Non-stop streams of confetti hung up on the walls, and giant banners fastened anywhere there was room. Robin wasn't usually the one to go to these type of events, but life was short, and she figured that nothing could go wrong. What a naive thought. The first problem that should have set alarms off in her head was that Tristan told her he wasn't going. He didn't give her a reason, but she should have just stayed home after finding out that Tristan wasn't going to show up. After that, the next time she saw Alice, instead of a glare or scowl, she simply smiled at her. That gesture did give off a warning signal to her, but how was she supposed to know that that was the reason she was smiling? Robin showed up to the parking lot outside the high school's football stadium. She could hear the crowd roaring from her spot. Even more confetti had sprayed onto the field. Multiple food vendors which fragrance made her stomach rumble were parked on the sides. The band played their fanfare repeatedly. Everything was so festive. She continued to walk in. Weirdly, people were giving her sidelong looks. Some looks were filled with pity, others suspicion. That was the second problem that should have set off more alarms, but the festivity probably distracted her. Robin scaled the bleacher stairs and found a seat in the middle of the crowd. The students cheered for the bands and threw toilet paper in the air. Robin began to fade away into the background, and that made her feel at ease. Hey, Robin, Alice said from behind her. Robin's shoulders tensed and she turned around. Alice was giving her a menacing smile. I finally found you. A few other students started to pay attention to them. What do you want? Robin spat back. Her fists involuntarily clenched. She thought Alice wouldn't bother her anymore. I just wanted to have a little honest chat with you, she answered. About you and my boyfriend. She began speaking loud enough that the people around her could easily hear. How long has he been cheating on me with you? Robin's cheeks began to flush. What are you talking about? Alice laughed noisily, continuing to grab the attention of the people surrounding them. She pointed at Robin as if she were a piece of garbage. Look at her blush. That means I'm telling the truth, right? Robin shook her head. No. At this point, students had circled themselves around the two of them. A few of them whispered amongst each other. Isn't her boyfriend Tristan Gray? A girl murmured. Now that you've mentioned it, I've seen the two of them hanging out a lot lately, her friend added. Robin felt her rage rising. She wasn't sure how much more she could take. Alice gave her one last serpent's smile. And guess what? I did some research on your father, too. Alice boasted. You know what I found out? Her father is a villain. Robin's blood turned cold. The students began backing away as if she had suddenly caught on fire. Not just any villain, either, Alice continued. Her dad is the former #1 villain in the world, Apex. Enough. Robin shouted, though, her voice no longer sounded like her own. Robin's voice reverberated, and the band had stopped playing the fanfare. The cheerleaders were no longer doing their routine, the vendors weren't selling their food, nobody threw toilet paper or confetti. It was as if the world had stopped for a moment. Robin looked down at herself. Her body was covered in dark energy. It looked as if she was standing in the center of black fire. She looked back up at Alice, whose face had become sickly pale. Alice took a frightened step backwards, and Robin stuck a hand out. She flew into the metal barriers at the top of the bleachers as if Robin had struck her with a missile. Finally, the students reacted. They screamed and scattered for the exits. Robin sauntered towards Alice, who was still laying against the dented metal fence. She stepped over the rubble and the dented bleacher seats that Alice had crashed into. Robin stood over her and looked down at her. A deep cut had opened up on her forehead, trickling past her mouth and down her chin. She grabbed Alice's hair and raised her head, similar to the way she had done to Robin. Alice grunted in pain since her now crooked arm brushed against the fence. It was definitely broken. That brought a smile to Robin's face. "How unfortunate," Robin said with false empathy. She grabbed Alice by her messed up arm, making her scream. "I'm no doctor, but I might be able to help with that." Robin lifted her up. Alice started to squirm, tears welling up in her eyes. "Please," Alice cried. "I'm sorry." "You're only sorry because I'm making you feel pain," Robin pointed out. That's not true?" "Yes it is," Robin interrupted. Alice began to sob. She aimed her other arm at Robin and released her stupid pink energy once again. Robin gritted her teeth. With a shout of anger, she flipped Alice over her shoulder and slammed her into the bleachers. Fragments of metal flew up on impact. As Alice bounced off the ground, Robin followed up with a kick, sending her flying through the fence at the front of the stands and rolling onto the field. In one bound, Robin jumped from the stands to the field. She loomed over Alice and raised a foot over her head. "Stop, villain!" someone called from across the field. The man wore red superhero clothes with a white arrow on his chest. Robin recognized that hero from the news. His name was Boost. "Leave her alone!" he shouted. Boost quickly appeared in front of her and slammed his fist into her face. She staggered back and lifted her arms to block his next attack, but of course Boost was quicker. He dashed around her and kicked her in the back. Robin whirled and threw an elbow, but Boost had already disappeared. "Geez, you're slow," Boost taunted. Rage continued to build up. He ran towards her again, but it was slower this time. Either he had slowed down, or Robin had simply sped up. He threw a punch at her face, but Robin easily evaded it. She countered by aiming her hand at his face. Boost ran straight into her hand and she grabbed him. Before he could realize what had happened, she slammed him into the ground, and he was on his back in a crater. "I think you're the one who's slow," Robin responded. Boost tried to get up, but Robin put a knee on his stomach. She landed an uppercut, sending his head recoiling back. The punch should have sent him flying, but her knee kept him laying still in one spot. She threw a flurry of punches at him until his face was a bloodied mess. Robin got off his stomach and began to walk away. There was a whistling sound above her before something with the force of an airstrike smashed into the field. She turned back around and scowled. The smoke and dust had cleared. Standing before her was another hero. A hero that everyone at the school would recognize. After all, there was a statue of him on their front lawn.